name is David Pluviose, and welcome to In the Margins. Today we have as our guest Gloria Blackwell, CEO of the American Association of University Women. Gloria, welcome to In the Margins. It's so good to have you. My first question for you is, why did you decide to take on the responsibility of leading AAUW?
Well, thank you so much, David, for having me. One of the reasons that I decided that at this time in my life, AAUW's leadership was something that I was willing to take on is in part because I'd already given a great deal of my career to AAUW, that I was committed to the mission and committed to the values of this organization. But I also saw it as an opportunity as a Black woman to step up in a space in which leadership in nonprofits is actually not so great for Black and brown women. And, AAUW in particular has had a long commitment to diversity and inclusion through our programs and through our fellowships. But let's be frank, I'm only the second Black woman in 140 years to lead this organization. And so I was looking for an opportunity to take up the challenge and also to help people to understand that, Black women need to be leading these organizations, and that I also had the confidence and I had the backing of so many of my mentors and colleagues who supported me in this effort.
You talk about you being the second African American to lead AAUW. I was wondering if you could talk about the unique vantage point that you have as an African American woman, and what is the significance of you being the second African American to lead AAUW? Gloria, what is the significance of the historic nature of your appointment?
Well, I think it's part of the representation that is so important for both young women, girls, and boys to see that African American women can step up as leaders and that our perspectives are incredibly valued. So, for example, for an organization that focuses on education and training, leadership, and advocacy and research, and that has done a really good job in terms of philanthropy and programming in ensuring that we are providing support to sort of elevate all women. One of the things that we also needed to do was to make sure that we were living those values of diversity and equity and inclusion within our own organization. Being a leader in an organization also of color also provides a perspective that gives you a voice in the room, a voice at the board table, a voice at the local branch meeting, wherever we are all over the country, that provides a perspective that is often missing. AAUW's origin story is that of an organization that was started by 17 white women back in 1881 in Boston. And it is, in terms of its membership, it is a predominantly white organization. I have been here providing my perspective, my experience, and helping the organization to really, get more understanding of the broader input that needs to be had by all women, and sort of making sure that we are not being an organization that is focused only on, and the organization has never been only focused on, what are the issues for white women. We are an equity organization who really cares about equity for all. And if Black women don't have a seat, at the table or a place in the room, our concerns, issues, and perspectives get left out. And so one of the things that I've also been able to do as a leader is to make sure, things big and small, whether it's images, whether it's wording, whether it's the way we issue statements, that we're very clear that we want to make sure that we are taking into account the lived experiences of all women. I'm a first-gen college student. I bring that perspective to the table. But I'm also someone who stepped up for AAUW, I came here, 17 years ago as a fully fledged, informed professional with skills and education and opportunity. And I wanted to make sure that I was going to be able to use those skills. So, when you mention the United Nations, part of it is because I came here from AAUW directly from spending 3 years working on a girls' education program in 5 sub-Saharan African countries, right? So, I see everything that I do through a lens of inclusion, through a lens of equity, through having had the opportunity to have experiences, not only domestically, but experiences around the world. And I think it's an incredible asset that I bring to AAUW, because not only does it give me that experience, but it also gives me a high level of empathy as well. And when we talk about what are the needs for women across the spectrum.
Gloria, I was wondering if you could talk about some of your priorities since taking on the leadership mantle at AAUW. I know that you have been working on issues such as pay equity and other issues. What are some of the things that you want to see accomplished in your tenure as CEO of AAUW?
So AAUW, we do have a strategic plan in place that I am clearly taking a look at. It was established just about 2 or 3 years ago with my predecessor. And so clearly, since I was here, I played a role in making sure that my perspective and voice is a part of that. But when you take on the helm of the organization, things seem to change a bit because you're looking at it from a totally different perspective. I've had a number of roles at AAUW, led a number of departments, and you also have to take a look at the snapshot and where we are at this moment. Because things are, as you probably can see, more than a little bit different than where they were in 2020. And so taking that into consideration, I'm focusing on AAUW's strategic pillars around education and training, leadership in women's economic security, but really re-examining them through the lens of where are we now? We did this at the sort of beginning of the pandemic. I'm not sure if there's going to be an end, but we're in a different place now. And some of the ways in which we focused on activities have really needed to shift. And so when we see, for example, that my focus is really on one, we are a membership organization. So one of the priorities is really ensuring that our members and the role that they play continues to be lifted up, and the value and the impact that they bring to the organization. We have 140,000 members, donors, supporters, and advocates in this organization who contribute greatly to its impact. But what does that mean? Can we get a true sense of what is going on? What is the impact? What are the activities that are happening? And how can we use those activities? How can we use that engagement to further AAUW's mission? We have a lot of successful programming going on. And so whether it's our programming, research, or our advocacy, how can we use that to leverage that success to expand and enhance the impact that the organization has? Because ultimately what we see is a different state for women in this point in time. We see the impact of the pandemic. We are doing research around so many of the topics that we have been working on for decades that we thought by now we would have reached a solution that would have provided a greater sense of equity for women. And it just hasn't come true. And so my priority really is to stay focused on our issues around student loan debt, around pay equity, around access to higher education, and make sure that AAUW is continuing to be solutions driven. There are always external challenges. And of course, there are the internal challenges of an organization, like many other nonprofits in this space, who are dealing with new ways of working. We are a hybrid organization. ensuring that fundraising is taken care of. So the many, many hats that have to be worn as a CEO of a very complex organization that's been around for 140 years. My priority is to make sure that we build on the strengths that we have, like our fellowships and grants. This year, we awarded $6 million in funding to women scholars and community-based programs. During the pandemic, we increased our giving by $2 million when so many other organizations were pulling back. And so, I have a goal of AAUW's vision, which is equity for all. And the way that we're going to get there is to continue to listen to the voices of women, provide the resources and training, advocacy, and research that they need, and do it through the methods that include our powerful on-the-ground advocates of our membership. Just a small agenda I have here at AAUW.
You are a first-generation college graduate. And of course, I am sure you have seen statistics that indicate that Black women as a group have some of the highest student loan burdens. I was wondering if you could talk about the student debt issue specific to Black women, and what are some solutions that you see out there to alleviate this debt burden that is disproportionately borne by Black women?
Yes, you're absolutely correct. And as a first gen college student, my parents, certainly were very strongly in favor of education, being the means by which I was going to be able to have a great career and be successful and accomplish so many of the things that they wish that they had accomplished for themselves. And so the ongoing promotion of a degree in higher education, as that great equalizer, as we have been talking about, for the past 40 years, is something that people continue to push, promote, and believe in. And I can't say that I'm not a believer in that. But what we do know is that the promise of higher education and access to higher education and what it was going to bring has certainly not been equal for all of us. And Black women in particular have certainly been disproportionately impacted. So, women overall are holding 2/3 of the nation's student debt. Student loan debt is about $1.6 trillion. And women overall have about just over 900 billion of that, numbers that we can't even begin to imagine. And because of the pay gap, obviously, women have a harder time paying off that debt. And because Black women currently only earn 63 cents for every dollar that a white man earns, Black women have a more difficult time in paying off that debt. It makes it incredibly difficult for them to, build a nest egg or, do what they want to do in life or even pay for basic expenses. We recently did a survey of women in all 5 boroughs in New York City, and we'll be releasing it in a few weeks. But it really highlights that disproportionate impact and the fact that, white families more often give help in paying for college than students of color, right? So our survey really found that was a piece of inequity throughout everything that we researched, whether it's loans, white women are less likely to take out loans than Black women, more likely to be able to pay them off in a shorter period of time. And so, these kinds of numbers have detrimental impact on the ability to Black women to be able to be successful and to have the economic security that one feels is promised when one gets a degree. And so, these are things that compound so that as they build up throughout their careers, Black women then end up, with higher rates of poverty, in retirement, lower pensions. And so it really does start right out of college when that pay gap is sort of knocking on the door of women and women of color in particular. And I think that affordability has to be a part of the conversation. Black women are more likely to attend, for-profit institutions where you take out a higher proportion of loans, which of course then makes it more difficult to pay them off. I think that education debt is a racial justice issue. It is an issue that contributes to the racial wealth gap. And, the solutions are ones that have been put forth for decades, but are relying in major part on our government to actually step up. They know what the issues are. So much legislation has been introduced over the years. While everyone is certainly thankful at this point in time that the student loan suspension, is still on the books until September, the fact of the matter is it really needs a definitive decision and solution. We're happy to see that ITT Tech and all of these other for-profit institutions that student debt has been wiped up. But the fact of the matter is we have so many borrowers who need more than that. And so whether it's increasing Pell Grants or, making sure that, other ways to sort of keep the promise that was made, extending emergency assistance for students. There's so many ways that our government can step up and really make sure that students are not continuously burdened with student debt over 30 or 40 years. Because if it doesn't happen, the systemic ways in which the economic security of Black women is threatened will have no resolution. And that's what we want here at AAUW. And it's a huge part of the advocacy that we do. The promise of economic security, the promise that if you get a higher education degree and what that will mean, has certainly not come to fruition. A Black woman with a bachelor's degree on average earns less than a white man with a high school education, right? And so the way that education and getting a degree is also still promoted as that equalizer is something that I think we all should be taking a look at. And I know that, certainly colleagues in other organizations, along with AAUW, have been doing that kind of research as well. Taking a look at, why is it that we are requiring a degree for, so many positions that in fact don't need a degree. And also looking at the fact that we are not treating everyone that earns a degree equally. And the pay gap is something that has an incredible impact on all women's ability to pay back those loans, particularly Black women. And if we don't address the pay gap, we're never going to address the student debt crisis, nor the inequity in the racial wealth gap.
I was wondering if you could talk about some of the public policy advocacy that you are involved in. The Biden administration has extended the pause in federal student loan repayment that has provided some relief. We've seen a lot of activity around public service loan forgiveness, trying to provide more relief. There have been pushes to wipe out all debt or wipe out student debt to a lesser degree. I was wondering if you could talk about your public policy advocacy and what steps you believe the Biden administration should be taking if we would like to see a substantial amount of relief.
So absolutely everything that you just mentioned. We need to really take into account the impact of the pandemic on all of these factors and the impact that it has had on our students who are attending college, whether they're community college students or those in four-year institutions. We see how the number of students has dropped. There are many, many reasons why that has occurred. The state of the economy is one that the inflation, all of the things we know that have made it more difficult, particularly for students of color, the increase in hunger with students as well. So we really want the emergency aid that was available during the pandemic to continue and just really build out those assistance programs that shouldn't just disappear because we think that the pandemic is over, that the way in which those programs really helped students and were just transformational in helping them to be able to stay at their institutions and thrive are really, really important. Definitely canceling student debt. We don't, we know it's referred to as forgiveness, but it's really about canceling the student debt and making sure that there is a robust plan in place to ensure that it is fair and equitable across, institutions and individuals. And at the very basic level, if student loan cancellation is something that, we continue to advocate for, and the administration does not enact, to really look at some of the repayment issues that are on the table as well, like income-driven repayment and other opportunities that would decrease the burden on Black and brown women are really, really important. I mentioned Pell Grants before. Given the fact that inflation is so high, the purchasing power of all that we have has certainly been decreased. And so, the maximum Pell Grant needs to increase, obviously, as our economy is in an inflationary period. And I think anything related to closing the gender pay gap will certainly help with this situation as well. I think our policymakers really need to provide and act on the solutions, that are meaningful and that are going to have an impact for our students, whether it's college, debt cancellation or affordability. Because of course, one of the main drivers of student loan debt is the increase in the cost of attendance, which is off the charts. And so if college itself can be examined through the lens of affordability, that would provide some great insight into also understanding why these costs have risen at such a fast rate, and how it has also driven up the loan payments and the loans that students have been taking out in order to be successful. Those are all things that the administration can work on. I think that if we're talking about success for students in higher education, it's really important because it's not only at the federal level, it's also at the state and the local level. Collaboration needs to take place so that we do have a robust package of all of these solutions that are coming together to ensure, that access to education and affordability is something that is available to anyone who wants to pursue a higher education. We push education. We have seen how it has been the driver to, increasing the economic status of so many low income and low wealth individuals. We want everyone to have a better chance of achieving an economically stable future and an economically stable life. AAUW has an advocacy tool called the 2-Minute Activist, available on our website, where we provide an opportunity for individuals to, use their voice, to contact their federal officials and their local officials on all of these issues, whether it's, passing the Paycheck Fairness Act, student loan debt cancellation, making sure that college affordability is on the table. And it really provides a great opportunity for, our elected leaders to hear from their constituents. Last year, we sent over 66,000 messages and letters to the Hill on these very topics.
Gloria, when we talk about the push to encourage more girls and young women to see careers in STEM as viable, I think about the impact of student debt on career choices. I was wondering if you could talk about efforts perhaps that you have undertaken to increase the participation of girls and young women in STEM fields.
So STEM fields obviously include so many of the highest paying fields. They are also the fields in which women are represented at the lowest levels. So if we have the opportunity to get more women into those fields, they certainly would be better positioned from an economic standpoint. And so AAUW started working in STEM, at the very beginning of the organization, because while the organization really started around giving women access to higher education, not just at the undergraduate level, but at the graduate level, it also wanted to make sure that women had access in all fields and all disciplines, and STEM was certainly one of those. We funded so many of the early scientists and women in engineering, back in the early 20th century, and so that is something that tells everyone that even back then, the value of women being represented across fields was incredibly important. It was AAUW that spearheaded the fundraising campaign so that Dr. Marie Curie could purchase her gram of radium to do the research that she did that led to her Nobel Peace Prize. And since, the late, in the early 60s, we've been awarding a fellowship in her name, right? So many of the women who were pioneers in STEM received funding from AAUW. And so that translates to today because so many of those women were dedicated to lifting up other women in STEM, right? So they emerged in higher education, they had leadership positions, they understood, and their perspective was important because of what they had gone through. And so that pipeline of mentorship and getting women in positions so that they're able to help other women along the way is something that continues. And that representation and showing up is incredibly important for women of color. We know that in order to understand the possibilities, you really need to see someone walking in that space who looks like you. And so AAUW has done a great deal of research and programming and advocacy around STEM since its beginning back in 1881. And STEM has really been key because we've continuously seen it as the driver of helping economic security as well as ensuring that women are represented across disciplines. We know that there are specific fields, specific disciplines that are held by women, whether it's, education and social sciences, and today working in healthcare, those are areas that we know women are disproportionately represented in. We also know that those are fields that aren't as high paying. And so as long as women are continuing to be concentrated in those fields, moving up and achieving that economic mobility and security is going to be even more difficult. Just yesterday, as a matter of fact, we ended a virtual program that we have been doing for high school girls this summer, where we had 10 sessions for high school girls and several sessions for their parents, understanding that the learning and knowledge about STEM needs to start early. Based on so much of the research which we've done, Why So Few was a report that we did over a decade ago about the challenges of girls in STEM and providing those solutions. So we take our research and we try to put it into practice, utilizing our programs. And so that program was really based on, one, providing hands-on opportunities for girls, making sure that they had an opportunity to hear from women who are actively engaged in the STEM field. We have over 13,000 individuals who have received our fellowships and grants. And so we have an amazingly strong cohort of women across STEM fields who can come and speak to their experiences so that girls can understand the vast array of careers that are available and can see someone who looks like them, who is working as a forensic scientist or working, as an anthropologist or a software engineer, or who's doing research on HIV and AIDS. All of those are really, really important. And so for STEM, getting women into those higher paying fields is really key to helping to close the pay gap. We know that it will increase their salaries. We know that it will provide them with an opportunity and an upward trajectory in terms of economic mobility. But we also know that the STEM workforce is one that continues to be focused on, hiring people of the same sex. We know that in the past 20 years, the number of women software engineers has only increased by 2%. I think we have just over 25% of our undergrads are in STEM fields. And so that challenge of making sure that the systemic issues around bias, discrimination, sexism, and racism, which are so prevalent in the STEM fields, are addressed as well. And AAUW, through our programming, through our research, and certainly through our fellowships funding, has contributed so much to breaking down so many of the barriers in those fields. But what we are still continually fighting against that uphill battle of ensuring that we have women in leadership positions, for example, in our higher education institutions, who can also serve as role models and who can have a voice in how women are being supported on our campuses.
My last question for you is, what might you say to the higher education administrators who are viewing this podcast with regards to how they can expand access for women staff and faculty on their campuses? Obviously, there has been a push and there has been success in seeing more women represented at all levels in higher education. Given where we are today, you've talked about the pandemic. What would be a word that you would want to say to higher education administrators watching this podcast who want to increase access for women staff and faculty? What are some of the most important things that they should be considering at this moment?
Sure. I think that the gap of leadership in higher education is a very, very important issue. Earlier this year, we did some research with the EOS Foundation on the women of color leadership gap, focusing on our top research institutions, the 130 R1s. And the findings, unfortunately, they were unsurprising. I mean, women were vastly underrepresented, women of color even more so. And I think that at a time when women make up the majority of college students, right, and that they outnumber men at every level, in degree attainment and attendance, the fact that we still have such a disproportionate lack of women in these leadership positions at all levels is troubling, because it also demonstrates that we haven't made the commitment to ensuring equity across our higher education institutions. If our board chairs continue to be white men, if tenured faculty continue to be white men, if so many of the leaders don't look like the students who are on our campuses, then that does not provide a sense of the ability to move up and be successful for our students. It also doesn't provide the perspective that is broadly needed to understand the diverse needs of the student population, which is really important. We know that it's not a pipeline issue. We know that there are more than enough qualified women. We know that Women are, 40% of all academic deans and provosts at these top institutions. And yet we see the number of women presidents just not being there in order to make sure that young women can see themselves represented at those leadership levels. So I think part of what we really need for our academic institutions is leadership that is more expansive and inclusive. Making sure that they are rooting out bias and discrimination at all levels of their institutions, and just being intentional about it all, because intentionality really is the key. The solutions themselves have been put forth for decades. Those in power know what they are, but we need to consciously choose and make decisions about leaders that are going to be able to really implement these solutions if we're ever going to have the systemic change that is needed to have the success for our college students, that will help bolster not only their student careers, but to get them firmly prepared for entering the workplace and for a solid and economically stable and safe future. So promoting systemic change around diversity, equity, and inclusion is the true responsibility of our higher institution leaders, and the value that they can bring to our students, particularly our marginalized students, is something that is a great responsibility. And we really need more women in roles to be able to provide their perspectives so that we can provide that access to education and the success when they reach campuses.
Gloria, thank you so very much for joining us here for In the Margins. I appreciate you for taking time out of your busy schedule to share your perspective on such important issues. Thank you.
Thank you so much, David. It's been a pleasure.